debut title of Ascendant Studios, Immortals of Aveum. Now I was glad to see a demo was available, because I'm always on the lookout to keep my YouTube hobby affordable for myself. I was also glad to see a demo was available, because I wanted to have a look at an Unreal Engine 5 titles, just to see what settings there are and if we can still run Unreal Engine 5 titles in 4K at 60 FPS on a system like I have. Now I had a look at the Matrix Reloaded demo back in the day on my PS5 long ago, but that was more of a tech demo and this is a game, so I'm very curious. So in this video we'll dive into the demo, see what settings there are and see if we can get some optimized settings to run the game at 60 FPS in 4K. And also, I've turned up the global illumination in my room because it's a bit of a dark day outside. Well, welcome to HEnK Gaming, guess who I am? And let's have a look. And starting off with this action-packed scene, and one of the heaviest to run, in the demo at least. At the lowest we see our FPS drop to 60 FPS, but well, that's still 60 FPS. And this is at 4K. Well, not native, DLSS is set to the performance level, but without frame generation. And who needs generated frames when we have this nice amount of frames per second with these colorful graphics? Well, now that I think of it, it would have been a nice test to see how frame generation would handle all these colorful particles. I doubt it would look good actually, but only thinking of this now while the video is done. Maybe some other time. But cool optimized settings, let's have a look at what compromises we made and how our optimized settings help FPS wise. On your left you see all settings set to their highest values, which are usually ultra, and on the right you see the optimized settings. Spot any differences? Other than the frame rate of course. I think the optimized settings run about 5 to 6% better than the ultra settings. That's not a whole lot, but I found that turning everything to low or everything to ultra didn't make that big of a difference in FPS anyway. But well, when in need of FPS, every bit counts I guess. And of course both of these are shown with DLSS set to the performance level. Well, let's quickly go over the optimized settings and see what we changed. And we'll start at the display tab. Display mode you can leave to borderless windowed of course, if you're not planning on changing your resolution from what Windows is running at. FreeSync should be turned on if you have a TV without FreeSync or G-Sync of course. Now I leave it off because I want to measure FPS higher than 60 of course. DLSS I would say, as almost always, turn it on and set it to the performance level. I think it looks great overall and I think this is the best way to get a nice performance boost. Frame generation I left off, because this disables VSync when turned on and I don't like screen tearing. Also, I don't know if this game is great for frame generation. Many unpredictable smaller details like particles don't go really well with frame generation I believe. And if you can't use DLSS, use FSR or perhaps turn down your resolution, as FSR may give you a bit of a muddy look. Then moving on to the graphics tab. And please note, after looking at the optimized settings, I will have a more in-depth look at each setting to see what it does. I have set the FOV or field of view to max 90, as I always like a little bit of a wider view in games. Set the texture quality to ultra, visual effects quality, shadow quality and post-processing quality can all be set to low. Volumetric Fog Quality can be set to low, it doesn't really make a difference I think however. Global illumination quality we set to ultra, although I do think if you need more FPS you could lower this. Switching this by the way needs to restart the game. Reflection quality can be set to low. Anisotropic filtering you can set to 16 times. Atmosphere you can set to low. I did not see any differences switching this, but I did also not see any differences in FPS, so it doesn't really matter I think. Cinematics depth of field set it to ultra, but I hadn't had a good look at this, but well, you want your cinematics to look great I guess. Foliage quality you want to set to ultra. Light shafts, you definitely want to have this on, as off looks really bad. Local exposure, I left this to on. Mesh quality I set to low. Cinematics motion blur I set to ultra, but again I hadn't had a good look at cinematics settings. Particle quality I would set to ultra, it requires a restart when changing this setting. Shadow mesh quality set that to ultra. Shadow resolution can be set to low. Mesh pool size and shadow rendering pool size I've set to ultra. And the render target pool size I've set to the max of 1000. Well, hope these settings help, and if they do, please leave a like and consider subscribing for more of HEnK Gaming. But stay tuned as we will have a look at all these settings to see what they do or don't and why I have chosen them. First, however, I had so much trouble with some of these settings to see what the effect of those was, but also sometimes to see what the setting was supposed to do. Atmosphere quality, for example. What does that do, or where should I look to see the effect of it? Since the game doesn't explain these settings and if you don't see the effect on screen, a helpful method can be to use the GeForcce Experience app. This app does explain the settings. Give it a go. Probably this also works if you don't have an Nvidia card. But well, just wanted to point that out, it can be helpful. At the same time, knowing where to look, I still didn't see the effect of some settings. Oh well, onto those I did see. And we'll start with texture quality. I think Ultra looks a tiny bit sharper than high or low. FPS wise it doesn't really matter. VRAM usage on low seems to be about 100 megabytes lower than on Ultra. But my measurements here might be off a little, because high seems to use 50 megabytes more than Ultra, which is weird. However, I will leave this at Ultra since I have enough VRAM. That is 12 gigabytes by the way. A 4070 Ti cost me as much as all the rest of my PC. Unbelievable. Well, I'll stop complaining about how much money I was able to spend on my PC. And look at visual effects and post-processing. Yes, 2 in 1. In this shot it gives you about 4% win in FPS when both are set to low. I don't really see any difference. I made the shot a little bit off-center because in the back in the distance there's an effect as well. But that is also present on all 3 settings levels. So I think you can turn these down to low and have a little bit more FPS in those visual effects heavy scenes, like in the beginning where you have your color spray superpower moment. Up next is shadow quality. Now looking down you can definitely see the effect of turning this setting down quite well. That is, however, if you're not distracted by your missing feet and legs. Am I floating? Are my feet and legs just invisible to the human eye, but do they block sunlight? What's going on here? However, I think the low setting runs ever so slightly better. It's just a little bit more in the 90 or 91 FPS than the others are. So a very small win in FPS. Now looking down you see the differences in shadow quality quite well, but if you were to look up a bit more, and you usually are in this game, you don't really notice the difference in shadow quality, I think. And sometimes when the light sources are a bit further away, your shadow will be a bit softer, and in those cases you don't see a quality difference at all, going for the very small win in FPS. From the shadows going into the light with global illumination, just like in my office. Now this one is a bit difficult to really compare, as we need to restart the game when switching this setting. Looking at these first shots side by side, at first glance, no real differences I think. The FPS increase when setting the global illumination to low, however, is significant, about 11% compared to Ultra. Going to medium gives you about 5% win in FPS compared to Ultra. But let's have another look and put only low and Ultra on screen, so we have a little bit more of the area to look at. And then look at the trees on the right. On Ultra these are bright green, lit by light. On low, however, it's almost as if these are in the shadows or something, not getting any sunlight. And that's not good for trees, they need sunlight. So for the sake of the trees, I would leave global illumination to Ultra. Now the question is, would you notice this during gameplay when not looking at the images side by side? Well, let's have another look. In the, where are we? The Palace of the Immortals? I don't know. Anyways, here we mainly see that the corridor in the center seems a bit darker on Ultra. Maybe it's getting less light, but when I loaded the save later on to have a look at this, I thought it was more bright, like on medium or low. So am I going crazy? Also, on medium I saw a bit of a shadow flicker, but only on medium. However, that corridor is the main difference I noticed here, and the difference in FPS seems a little bit smaller as well. Between Ultra and low we see a 6% difference now. But well, just as in the area outside, let's have a wider look and put only low and Ultra on screen. And I've put the image a bit off center so we can have a look at a little bit of the wall on the left. And on Ultra, this wall seems to catch some light coming in through the windows from behind, while on low the wall is just shaded and doesn't receive any light. So I will set global illumination to Ultra, as I think the lighting looks better and will make the game look better overall. But turning this setting down to low will give you a nice boost in FPS, and it's a consistent setting, no weird pop-in will happen, just the overall look will be a bit different. When you're not putting images side by side, I don't think you will really notice this, so keep this setting in mind if you need more FPS. I will leave it at Ultra however, but mainly for the health of the trees of course. And by the way, if you do plan on playing the game with global illumination set to low and you see some light flickerings, these light flickerings happen on Ultra as well, so don't worry about that, it's just the way it is. Well, let's go outside to look at reflections then, and I found a lovely puddle to do so, but I don't think the setting makes any difference. Not in FPS and not in graphics. I turn it down to low, but it doesn't really matter. And going to Ambient Occlusion then, I think there is no difference in graphics as well, and only a very small one in FPS. At the Ultra setting I see the 108 as max FPS, while on the low I see 109 coming by. So a very small 1% win in FPS, but well, at no graphical cost. Foliage Quality, and this one you do see, and in this scene it would give you about a 1% win in FPS going from Ultra to low, but I would leave this at Ultra. Now it could cost you a bit more when there's a full field of grass of course, but I usually like more lush and full grown nature, so I would say leave this setting to Ultra. Light shafts. Now I actually was looking for volumetric fog for this one. Usually the volumetric setting isn't just for fog but for light as well, and I saw absolutely no difference in the volumetric fog settings. But I thought, well, these are light shafts as well, might turn the setting off and see what happens. And this happened. Leave light shafts on, because when setting the setting to off, you still have light shafts, but just terrible looking ones. Turning them off would give you a win of about 2% in FPS, but you don't really want to turn this off, I think. Well then, let's go back to the building I don't know the name of to look at particles. And this portal, or whatever it is, has lots of particles. However, I don't really see any difference in these settings. Is low running a little bit better, or am I just imagining things? Well, since that was no good, I had a stroll to the battlefield of the Everwar to look at the sky filled with flaming bits of ash. And here I think the difference is more clear. On Ultra you have lots more particles than on low, at no extra cost really, although the frame rate counter is switching quite a bit, so I'm not completely sure. But I think you should leave this to Ultra. You want as much particles in your life as possible, I would say. Definitely in this game, as it has lots of them. Well, on Ultra that is, then. Moving on to a setting I had to look up. Shadow Mesh. And sometimes I'm wondering, does every PC gamer know what these settings mean? Do you all see Shadow Mesh and know, ah yes of course, that is the simplified representation of geometry of an object to use for calculating the shadows? Well, at least I learn something new every day. Maybe we'll see these kinds of terms more often in UE5 titles. However, the result of the Shadow Mesh setting to low is lower shadow details from a further distance. Low compared to Ultra gives you about a 2% win in FPS I would say, but I also think you want this setting left to Ultra. As you know perhaps, I find any kind of pop-in a bit immersion breaking. And looking at low, need I say any more? So keep this setting at Ultra. Now I must say, I would have expected every setting with mesh in its name to cause some kind of pop-in like this, but I didn't really see that. But well, let's head on to Subsurface Scattering. Also a setting I actually didn't really see any differences in, but since you need to restart the game to change this, I recorded some footage just for myself to compare actually. No real difference in graphics, also not really in FPS. Left this one to Ultra. Usually you could see it on human skin, but I didn't really see any of it. Well, I did see human skin, but not being scattered through the subsurface. Therefore I had a look at these shadows casting through the well-lit leaves. And then the last comparison, the lowest three settings: mesh pool size, shadow rendering pool size and render target pool size. Now when recording I had no clue what these settings did. I mainly saw a difference in VRAM usage. Roughly 250 megabytes for setting all these to low and the smallest size versus setting all these to ultra and the max size. Now probably only the shadow rendering pool size has impact on the VRAM usage. When I looked in the Nvidia experience tool, only after I captured almost all of my footage of course, I saw that the mesh pool size and the render target pool size mainly set how far objects are rendered to their full level of detail. So I would say keep this to Ultra and 1000, because it could reduce pop-in. Running around a little bit with the low settings, however, I didn't really notice any other pop-in than when running with the higher settings. Well, knowing all this, I hope it helps you with determining your own optimized settings, or just use the ones I've provided, of course. This was a difficult video to make, I must say. Lots of settings I didn't really knew what they did, or I didn't really see the effect of it, and not being able to save where I wanted, needing to copy and paste save games to be able to get to different locations. But what I do like and hope to see again in UE5 titles is that CPU-GPU indicator. You get an idea of what setting costs more and is heavier on your CPU or GPU. But some explanation of those settings would have been nice in the game. However, I thought the demo of Immortals of Aveum was a fun fantasy shooter. Since it's free and fairly short, give the demo a go, I would say. Well, hope you enjoyed that one. Thank you for watching, and please subscribe to my channel. You've made it this far in the video, might as well. Now in 2 weeks I'll be back, but I don't know what my video will be about. Maybe about the Ascent, a twin-stick cyberpunk shooter, or maybe about frame generation, when you use it on a screen that doesn't support FreeSync or G-Sync. If you have any suggestions, leave them down in the comments. And otherwise, I'll hope to see you again in 2 weeks. And have a Merry Christmas! Houdoe!